Laurier Centre for the Study of Canada for being a partner in our lecture series. My name is Ken Irvin. I'm the Education Coordinator at Guelph Museums, and I just want to give our land acknowledgements. We would like to acknowledge this place we call Guelph. It serves as traditional lands and a place of refuge for many peoples over time, but more specifically the Ottawa and the Haudenosaunee. This land is held as the treaty lands and territory within Mississauga and the First Nation. Guelph lies directly adjacent to the Halton Tract and is part of a long-established traditional hunting ground of the Six Nations of the Grand River. Many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who have come from across Turtle Island call Guelph home today. Guelph Museums continues to build our knowledge and relationships about the land, its history, and its peoples, and this commitment informs all that we do at Guelph Museums. And before we start, I just want to let you know that since we have someone from Field today, the armory is going to be on doors open this year. So that is a chance for you to and Susan Redwood at the back there is the one who's coordinating doors open. So if you want to volunteer too, we're still looking for a couple of volunteers. So there's volunteer opportunities there. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Ortiz-Sosa. He was born in El Salvador and immigrated to Canada in 1990. He joined the Canadian Armed Forces in February of 1996 as a private recruit with the 7th Toronto Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery. In 2015, he received a unit commendation and recognition of outstanding leadership and professionalism in his many roles. He served as battery commander of 9 and 130 batteries in Toronto from 2012 to 2016, and again from 2018 to 2020. He has served as the second in command of the 56th Field Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery, from 2016 to 2018, and was cadet liaison coordinator for the regiment and worked with the affiliated cadet units in Brantford, Simcoe, Fort Erie, and Niagara Falls. He has served as commanding officer of the 11th Field Regiment with batteries in Guelph and Hamilton since 2020, and he is very proud to have served and continue to serve with all 3 artillery units in southwestern Ontario. He has graduated from Glendon College, York University, with a combined honors BA in political science and history, and from Ryerson University with a certificate in economic analysis. He has 4 children and has been a foster parent to over 20 children through the Halton and Hamilton Children's Aid Societies. So thank you so much for coming. I'm really looking forward to your talk tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, good evening. Thank you so much for being here, and it's truly an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you tonight. Thank you for indulging me in talking about one of my favorite topics, which is an integration of really 3 different things. Is the history of the city of Guelph, and the history of the Royal Canadian Artillery, and how they have integrated, have been playing, dancing together with each other since the beginning of this city, throughout history, and continue to do so today and for the foreseeable future. Right? It's a pleasure for me to be here, especially in this location, right next to the Basilica of Our Lady of Immaculate Conception, and looking down the city is a great view to be here in Guelph, the Royal City. So the topic for today is Gunner City, military presence in Guelph. Right, so should we get started?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let me make sure this is working, and can everybody hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So, why is Guelph a gunner city? Right, so what I will attempt to do is to answer this question. We were going to talk about the history of the city, all the different time periods. We'll talk as well about the relationship with the Canadian Forces, how people from the city of Guelph and surrounding areas, Wellington County, have participated in those military conflicts that Canada has been called upon and taken part of. And we'll bring it to the present. We'll talk about the relationship between the two, the city and the military, and we'll bring it to the present and talk about current operations and how that relationship continues and how we see it going forward into the future. All right, so this is a reference I found somewhere online, and I thought it was quite appropriate. Guelph is often referred to as another city due to a significant connection to the Royal Canadian Artillery, RCA, particularly through the 11th Field Regiment Royal Canadian Artillery, which is based in the city. And this nickname reflects Guelph's long history with artillery and the vital role artillery units have played in the community's military heritage. So at this point, I'd like to add, right now, the only unit from the Canadian Forces in the city of Guelph is the 11th Field Regiment, which I have the honor and privilege to be the commanding officer. But through history, we had more units, we had different occupations, and even within the 11th Field, we had different military occupations. So it hasn't been just artillery. We had a history of having infantry units in here. Prominent among those was the Wellington Rifles. And are perpetrated today by our Royal Canadian Army Cadet Corps, the Wellington Rifles 1882. We also had aviation ground school here in the city, and that is perpetrated by the Royal Canadian Air Cadet Squadron, the 121 Red Arrows, right? We also have a Sea Cadet unit, Navy Cadet unit presently in the city. And there's been, we were just talking prior to beginning tonight how there was the 11th Field Ambulance here in the city, right? So there was a medical presence, a military medical presence in the city, and many other occupations. Perhaps not by organizations being here, but by individuals, people from this city and the surrounding areas that joined the military, went elsewhere, and joined different military occupations and participated in those conflicts that Canada was called upon. Anybody is familiar with this building?
Library. Oh yeah.
So, funny anecdote. Most people in the 11th Field Regiment, myself included, we are active reservists. So that's what you call the militia. That's what you call the citizen soldiers. So in addition to serving in unit, I'll go out for lunch, I'll go out for coffee, and usually I meet people from the city, and I can see eyebrows being raised, and they have this sort of confusion looking at your uniform, and they ask, are you coming from the Army? Are you going to the Army? What brings you to Guelph? And then I smile and I tell them, I am working at the Army here in Guelph. And then they become even more confused. And I always point this building out. And my question to them is like, have you noticed this building downtown that sort of looks like a castle? And the response I usually get is like, oh yeah, is that a library? Is that part of Canada Post? Like, what is that building? Right? So this building, this is our home. This is our military armory. It's been around for over 100 years. It was built at the beginning of the 20th century, 1902, 1906 period. And this place has been the place of work, the place of training for soldiers from this area for that long of a period, since it was built. It has been the setting for training and preparation for deployment to all the different conflicts we're going to talk about, right? So it's a pretty important piece of architecture for us as gunners, artillery professionals, but also it's an important part of history for the city of Guelph. It's part of the city's identity, right? It's part of right in the downtown core. So I just thought to put it in here and address that and make sure, please help me to spread the word to our fellow citizens in Guelph. This building is part of our identity. It's very important. It's been here for a while, for 120 years or so. All right, Guelph has a rich military history that spans several centuries and is shaped by its role in Canadian and British military affairs. So why British military affairs? You know, some people would say, well, that's a whole different country. What do we have to do with that?
We're part of the Commonwealth.
Exactly, we're part of the Commonwealth. And if you remember, when this city was built, it was prior to Confederation. And what we know today as Canada was then known as British North America, right? We were proud members of the British Empire. So whenever, today if an international conflict arises and we are called upon to help in the international scene, it is Canada that's being called to help. But back in the early 19th century, that was the British Empire that had to take that role. And we, as proud members of the British Empire, would go and help the British Empire's effort, right? So that's why it's important to note that it's not only the Canadian military affairs that have shaped us, but the British military affairs as well. That's part of our history, part of our identity. So the city of Guelph, a royal city, was founded in 1827 by John Galt as a planned community and was named after the British royal family, the House of Guelph. During its early years, the town was located in an area with a strategic importance, and there was a military presence to protect settlers from potential threats. Right? So just a little noting here. If we go back to 1827, there's a couple of major events that have taken place. One of them was the American Revolution. Another one was the French Revolution. So, and prior to that, we had, the battle in Quebec City, the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. So what we were calling in 1827 British North America had become British for not too many decades. Right prior to that, it was French. So we had this territory that was French became British. And prior to that, we had the indigenous people that were already here. And there's different indigenous nations. They would fight against each other. And some of them became allied with the French. Some of them became allied with the British. So sometimes when the English and the French were fighting each other, these indigenous nations would also come to war. And if there was an indigenous nation that was allied to the French, it would also attack not only the enemy indigenous nations, but also the British, right? And when this area became British, we became a target for those indigenous nations allied to the French. During the American Revolution, we had the French assisting the American revolutionary efforts, and then later, right, when after the French Revolution, we had Napoleon doing his campaigns in Europe, and the British came once again into conflict with the French. Now the Americans, in gratitude, I guess, for their French support during their American Revolution, they supported the French against the British. And part of that was the War of 1812, right? So while Britain was busy fighting the French in Europe, the United States thought of an opportunity to come into British North America and conquer this land and make it part of their new republic, right? So there was several threats in the area, and hence the need to have that military presence. Now, when I talk about the War of 1812, that's prior to the foundation of Guelph. Guelph didn't become a city formally until 1827, but it was rural communities, and there were people living in the area. And these people would be in need of protection, and they would also volunteer and help in efforts, right? So let's talk a little bit about the War of 1812. Though Guelph itself wasn't directly involved in many battles during the War of 1812, the area was part of the broader defensive strategies in Upper Canada. Local militias were raised, and Guelph was within range of many military movements in the region. So what that means is that many people living in this area back in 1812, right, we're going over 200 years ago, people in this area would go to places like Toronto, then called York, go to the Niagara Peninsula, and join the Empire's military efforts to defend the area. So the indigenous people of the area, those that were allied with the British, they played a very important role. The British regular forces that were stationed here played a very important role, but also those Canadian people living in the areas. Our ancestors, if you will, they took up arms as citizen soldiers and played also a significant role alongside those indigenous people and the British regular soldiers, right? So that's something that, as a citizen of Guelph, you should be proud of. That's part of your heritage, and it goes back to over 200 years ago, even before Guelph was formally a city. The militia in Guelph. So Guelph was home to various militia units, particularly in the 19th century. And many Guelph residents served in the Canadian militia, and the city became a hub for the 153rd Wellington Battalion of the Canadian Expeditionary Force during the First World War. Guelph history as a center for military training and mobilization continued into the 20th century, and I would argue it continues to today through the 11th Field Regiment. Right, so during World War I, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, during World War I, Canada organized its forces going overseas, going to Europe as the Canadian Expeditionary Force. And often what happened is people, citizen soldiers that were serving in different parts of the country, they would come together and form these CEF battalions, and then they would go. Right, so we're talking here about the 153rd Wellington Battalion. Those were the infantry folks. But remember, we're talking about Guelph being a gunner city. There was an artillery component as well. So the batteries that we have currently serving, 2-9 battery and 16 battery specifically, those were around back then, and they deployed as artillery components into the Canadian military effort.
Questions, sir?
My name's Captain Fry. Do we have, back to the War of 1812, long before obviously the armory or across the street, Guildhall, do we have any idea where in Guelph the Guelph garrison might have been during 1812, or is that more of a maybe a Guelph Museum question?
Yes, to be quite honest, I don't have the answer to that question, but I do know because Guelph wasn't a city yet. Perhaps we didn't have a established part of our regiment, but and it has a very rich history as well. But that's a topic for another day. That's more on the Hamilton side of the equation. So we're focused on 2-9 and 16 batteries in Guelph. Okay. So here we go. The 11th Field Regiment, Guelph Artillery. This regiment, historical roots date back to 1866, and its longest-standing presence in Guelph has cemented the city's connection to artillery. 1866 specifically is the year in which our most senior battery in Guelph was founded, and that is what we now call 2-9 battery. We have a habit in the Canadian Forces that sometimes we establish a system and then we say, no, we're going to change it, and we change names and we change things. So we did have in 1866 when the battery was first established, it was called 11 Battery, and later on it changed name and eventually became the 2-9 Battery. We do have the battery in Hamilton that coincidentally came to be part of the regiment, was designated 11 Battery. Originally they were the 4th Battery, right? So coincidence played tricks on us, history plays tricks on us, but that's what it was. So back in 1866 it was 2-9 Battery that was founded. In 1878, authority was granted to create a second battery, and that was the Ontario Field Battery, made up of students from the Ontario Agricultural College, which is now the University of Guelph. The long and valuable association of the college with the militia is commemorated by the H. Garrison gun placed outside of the Student Center at the University of Guelph. Right, so you can still see that artillery piece in there. It's not in the same shape that it was when it was located at the university, but nevertheless, it's still there. And my hope, my personal hope, is that one day we'll might be able to restore it.
It's pretty well protected right now.
It's not gonna rust.
All right, so I promise you we will talk about 5 different conflicts. This is the first conflict that I'm going to touch upon, and that's the Boer War. The picture that you see in there is a 12-pounder gun, and that was the equipment that was used in that time period. So during the Boer War, Canada sent a contingent of volunteers to assist the British against the Boer republics of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. Guelph was notable for contributing soldiers who served in the war. Many of these volunteers were part of the Canadian contingents, including those in the Canadian Mounted Rifles, a unit formed to serve in South Africa. I should also note, going back to the gunner connection, some of our artillery people that were serving with what is now 2-9 battery and 16 battery, they formed a nucleus called D battery that also went to South Africa, right? And we're going to touch into that a little bit later when we start talking about a couple of prominent citizens from Guelph that have that artillery connection. So the Boer War marked a significant moment in Canada's military history, as it was one of the first instances in which Canada independently participated in an overseas conflict. Even though the country was still part of the British Empire, the war also contributed to shaping Canada's national identity, as it demonstrated Canada's willingness to support the empire. Here's the second conflict, World War I, and that was the equipment that we were using at the time. That is an 18-pounder. So World War I was from 1914 to 1918. It was a global conflict characterized by trench warfare, the widespread use of artillery, machine guns, chemical weapons, specifically gas, and the introduction of tanks and aircraft. There's so much that can be said about World War I. I mean, it was meant to be at the time the war to end all wars, right? It was the biggest conflict that we had seen up to that point. And it really shaped our identity, right? So I'm going to focus a little bit into this city's contribution. And here you have it. Guelph's military contribution were significant during World War I. The 11th Field Regiment mobilized as part of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and it served in major battles such as Vimy Ridge, the Battle of the Somme, and many local soldiers sacrificed their lives during this time. A point that I like to make, right, we were talking earlier about the American Revolution, the United States. When you look at that conflict, right, 1776 is a point in time where the Americans decided, okay, from this point forward, we're no longer British, we're Americans, we're our own country. And, they went to war. It lasted a few years. It wasn't until 1883 when they got their constitution ratified, their agreement was sealed, and they became recognized internationally as a country. But you can go back to that conflict and say that's when they became a country, an independent country. With Canada, it's been more of an evolution. When I was a young university student, some time ago, one of my professors made a point that stuck with me. And that point was that during World War I, at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, we can look at that as Canada's war of independence. That was Canada's battle for independence. Not because we didn't want to be British and we were fighting against the Brits, quite the contrary. We were supporting the British effort. We were supporting the British side in the conflict. And we went and fought, often with British troops, under British leadership. And we were not fighting against them, we were fighting with them. But the reason that many consider Vimy Ridge as Canada's war of independence, and Canada's battle for independence, is because in that battle, Canada did something that other countries had tried and were not successful. Canadians were. We proved ourselves internationally, and we were able to demonstrate that there's something special about Canada. We have our own character, we're unique, we have a specific skill set that we can contribute internationally. That changed the way we as Canadians saw ourselves and the way that the international community saw Canadians, right? So later on, this paved the way, later, after the war has been concluded, in 1931, when the Statute of Westminster was signed, Canada, along with other countries like South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, they were given the status of dominion, and they were recognized not only to be equal to each other, but equal to Britain as well. And we started taking more ownership into our international affairs and more of the decision into the role that we wanted to play internationally. right? So Vimy Ridge, very important. And that takes me to the first prominent citizen of Guelph, right? Perhaps our favorite son from Guelph, and that's Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, right? Royal Canadian Legion branch here in Guelph is named after him. This is one of those characters that I don't think anybody has anything negative to say about him. This is one of those characters that can unite us, and you know, as citizens of Guelph, we should be very proud that he came from here. So that building that we were talking about, the Guelph Armories, that is a building where John McCrae used to work out of. And he was one of those young people training there and preparing for war. Back when he was a lieutenant, he was one of the leaders with those gunners that formed the battery to go into South Africa for the Boer War. He also participated in World War I as a lieutenant colonel. You know, as a citizen soldier like ourselves, he had a civilian job. He had a civilian occupation. He was a medical doctor. And back then it was called a brigade. And at the time it was the 1st Artillery Brigade, and that was in the year of 1880. Later on, once again, we like to change names, so we changed it, and it became the 11th Brigade, and hence we still keep that number. Sometime in the 1940s, I believe, Canada decided to change the way we group our batteries. So instead of having 4 batteries into a brigade, they decided to have 3 batteries into a regiment. And the 11th Field Brigade became the 11th Field Regiment. Okay? So, but back in 1880, when the 1st Artillery Brigade became one, then Captain David McCrae was one of the battery commanders. And in World War I, then Major David McCrae deployed, and he was the battery commander of 43 Battery. Okay, so the McCraes, we have a lot of gratitude to both of them, David and John, and we're proud to call them part of our heritage as gunners, and also part of our heritage as Guelphites. Here's a little blurb. So John McCrae lived from 1872 to 1918. He was a Canadian physician, poet, and soldier, best known for writing the iconic war poem In Flanders Field during World War I. McCrae wrote the poem in May 1915 after witnessing the death of his close friends, Lieutenant Alexis Helmer, during the Second Battle of Ypres. The poem reflects on the sacrifice of soldiers and the natural imagery of poppies growing in the battlefields of Flanders, Belgium. And In Flanders Field became one of the most famous poems of the war and helped popularize the red poppy as a symbol of remembrance for fallen soldiers. Right? And you can see this is a Canadian icon. It's something that this poem helped make very popular. And we can wear poppies not only across Canada, but across the British Commonwealth. This is a very, very well recognized symbol of remembrance. And it goes back to this poem in Flanders Field. All right, moving away from World War I into World War II. The piece of equipment that we see in here is the 25 pounder, and that was the weapon used at the time. In World War II, the 11th Field Regiment was again mobilized and played a crucial role in Europe. The regiment participated in critical battles and campaigns, including the invasion of Normandy and the liberation of the Netherlands. Many Guelph residents enlisted, and the city saw the return of veterans after the war. So, before I get to the next slide, I gotta mention at the beginning I said Guelph had different military occupations, and it had different artillery units in the plural. So one of those units was the 12th Field Regiment. Another unit was the 19th Self-Propelled Regiment. And both those regiments are very much linked to the 11th Field Regiment. So the batteries that are part of the 11th Field Regiment, specifically 2-9, 4-3, and 16, at the time they became the 12th Field Regiment, and they deployed to Europe under that name. The 63 battery was part of this 19th Self-Propelled Regiment, that also deployed to Europe. And the 11th Field Regiment continued here in Guelph, recruiting more Guelphites that were willing to go overseas and fight. So that's how we had different units, not to mention other people that would come from the region and join other artillery regiments. And later on, we're going to discuss one more artillery regiment that I haven't mentioned yet, right? But let's go to the next slide. So during World War II, 2-9 Battery was one of the artillery units serving with the 12th Field Regiment, RCA, and it was responsible for supporting infantry and armor units with indirect fire. Their actions would have included bombardment, counter battery fire, and providing suppressive fire during advances or defense. The 12th Field Regiment, including the 2-9 Battery, was part of the Canadian forces in Europe and participated in major battles such as the Normandy invasion, what we know as D-Day, and the Battle of the Scheldt, the liberation of the Netherlands. 2-9 Battery was deploying these and other significant actions contributing to the Allied war effort in the European theater. Right, so again, this is another conflict we can spend a lot of time talking about World War II. I'm going to leave it here at this point and introduce you to a second important figure in Guelph that has artillery roots. And that is this gentleman here with the name of Lieutenant Colonel George Drew. So George Drew lived between 1901 and 1996, so very much a 20th century man. Prominent figure in Canadian politics during the mid-20th century. He served as the 14th Premier of Ontario from 1943 to 1948 and founded a progressive conservative dynasty that would last 42 years, right up to 1985 when the Pearson Liberals came to power. He later served as the leader of the Federal Progressive Conservative, and he was the official leader of the leader of the official opposition from 1948 to 1956. Before provincial politics and federal politics, George Drew served as the mayor of Guelph from 1925 to 1929, and after retiring, George Drew continued to be a respected figure in Canadian political life and contributed to the public affairs for many years. He returned to the military as honorary colonel of the 11th Field Regiment, and this was a regiment that he commanded back from 1929 to 1935 when it was called the 11th Field Brigade. After politics, I should add, I didn't write this down here, but Colonel Drew, as he liked to be called, he served in London as the High Commissioner to the UK, and the last post that he had, the last public office that he held, was back in Canada, back in Guelph, as the very first Chancellor of the University of Guelph. Okay, so those connections run deep. Gunner, Guelphite, overall good Canadian. All right, so back from the people to the conflicts. We get into the Korean War. The Canadian forces were involved in the 1950-1953 Korean War and its aftermath. More than 30,000 Canadians participated on the side of the United Nations, and Canada sent 8 destroyers. Canadian aircraft provided transport, supply, and logistics. And we had 516 Canadians that died, 312 of which were from combat. And after the war, Canadian troops remained for 3 years as military observers, right? So deep history in Korea as well is another conflict that helped shape our identity. Tell you a little bit more. This is specific to Guelph and our efforts. So in 1951, bear with me, it's a bit confusing, but I can explain it after. In 1951, 216 Battery was created in Guelph. The ranks of 216 Battery were full of not only local residents from the Guelph area, but also of a large number of members of the 11th Field Regiment. In 1952, it joined 205 and 213 batteries to form the 81st Field Regiment. That regiment in 1953 became the 4th Royal Canadian Horse Artillery and replaced 1 RCHA in Korea. Arguably, the most significant action during the 81st Field Regiment's tour in Korea was in May of 1953 during the Chinese attack on Hill 187, when several soldiers from 216 Battery demonstrated great courage and were later recognized for their actions. So how they were recognized, either receiving medals of bravery, mentioned in dispatches, things like that. There was a number of people from Guelph that, fought with distinction and were later recognized for it. If you notice, there's a little coincidence in there. It's another habit that we have. So we talked about the Ontario Field Battery that started at the University of Guelph, later became 16 Battery, and that number 16, sometimes, we would get extension of 16 becoming 116 Battery, and then another extension becoming 216 Battery. So you see that 1-6, it's a connection to the original 1-6 in Guelph, right? So 216 Battery was the product of this area. It was a Guelph unit. It was a Wellington County unit. So this is something that people from here decided to join. And as I mentioned there, people that were already serving in the 11th Field Regiment, whether they were in 16 to 9 or 4-3 Battery, they decided, hey, I would like to go to Korea. I would like to contribute to that effort. And then they joined 216, and along they went to form the 81st Field Regiment, and later becoming 4RCHA, which was a regular force unit. All right, now that brings us to a period closer to home for me. The late 20th century, that's when I started wearing uniform. And that is the weapon I was trained with. That's a 105 C1 howitzer, right? So you can still see some of those. Some of the regiments still have them and use them for gun salutes, especially in Ottawa or provincial capitals like Toronto. All right, so what happened in the late 20th century? Well, a number of regimental personnel served as part of Canada's last full contingent to the United Nations forces in Cyprus in 1993. Others have served in the former Republic of Yugoslavia, in the United Nations missions to the Golan Heights, Cambodia, Sierra Leone, and other missions that I haven't mentioned in here. But this international participation included people from the 11th Field Regiment, people from Guelph and Wellington County. Domestically, members of the regiment deployed to flood-ravaged southern Manitoba in 1997. Soldiers deployed to ice-stricken eastern Ontario during the 1998 ice storm. Personnel deployed to A-Wing Trenton to support the Kosovo refugee crisis back in 1999. And the regiment also assisted in the search for missing persons. So something like that is not something that we do on our own, but we do send members to help, what we call aid to civil power. So if the police is conducting a search and rescue mission, members of the regiment can go and assist if we are asked to go and help, right? So this is some of the things that were happening, in a period closer to our present, right, late 19th century. Some of you might remember hearing things like that in the news. So we were there. We participated in this event. And that takes us to the last conflict that I'll touch on, which is the war in Afghanistan. The piece of equipment that you're seeing there is the M777. That is still being used in the regular force. And some of our reservists are already trained or trained in that equipment, and they use it when they deploy international and current operations. So the war in Afghanistan. After the 2001 terror attacks on the United States, Canada joined an international coalition to destroy Al-Qaeda, terrorist network, and the Taliban regime that sheltered them in Afghanistan. More than 40,000 Canadian Armed Forces members served in the 12-year campaign. The war killed 165 Canadians, 158 of them were in uniform, they were soldiers. But we have 7 civilians as well. I don't know if you remember hearing in the news, there was like a diplomat, there was an aid worker, I think a police officer as well. So there were some civilians that died in Afghanistan, and we don't hear about that often enough. But yeah, there were many of us that died in that conflict. At least 44 members from the 11th Field Regiment deployed to Afghanistan. Regimental Sergeant Major being one of them. right? So we got, this is the last conflict that we went out, and we have people who serve in that conflict still active in the Canadian Forces, the 11th Field Regiment as well. And that takes us to our current operations. So we talked about the history, we talked about how Guelph has contributed to the military, to both British military affairs, Canadian military affairs. We talked about how the regiment, based here in Guelph, has at some point or another gathered people, trained them, sent them overseas to contribute to those military operations. We discussed different operations, different conflicts. We discussed different people, like John McCrae, George Drew. How do we tie it all together? How do we bring it to the present? So there's different type of current operations that we have. There's international operations, and there's domestic operations, and there's all the things that may not be combat related, but are still relevant, and things that the military takes pride in assisting local governments and into helping Canadians. Right, so let's begin with the international operations. There's several military operations going on right now. I'll focus on the main three that we are focusing on. One of them is Operation Reassurance, and that's the Canadian Armed Forces contribution to NATO assurance measures in Eastern Europe, enhancing regional stability through training exercises and a continuous rotational presence. We also have Operation Unifier, and that's the Canadian Armed Forces military training and capacity building mission in Ukraine, aimed at enhancing the capabilities of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And last but not least is Operation Impact, and that's the Canadian Armed Forces participation in the Middle East, contributing to coalition efforts against terrorist organizations and supporting regional security initiatives. I'll highlight out of the three, I mean, all three are very important. The regiment has contributed to all three, and we continue to contribute to all three. Captain Fry, sitting right here, deployed with Operation Unifier 4 years ago.
28 and 21.
So, and we have also, we have other members at the Armory right now that we are present either in Operation Impact or Operation Unifier. We've got members that are currently training right now, and they're about to deploy on Operation Reassurance in Latvia. That's the operation I want to highlight for you all. Operation Reassurance, so traditionally, we Canadians have had a battle group presence in Latvia. So that's about 400 people approximately. We made a decision, the Canadian government made a decision to up the number to a brigade group. So we went from an average of 400 personnel to closer to 2,000 personnel. So the 4th Canadian Division, which is your Army presence here in the province of Ontario, 4th Canadian Division is taking the lead in Operation Reassurance. So not only are we upping the number from 400 to 2,000, but we're doing back-to-back rotation. And that is a first. That is a first that we have to force generate a much higher number of personnel that are going to deploy, and we have to do it back-to-back, right? So 31 Brigade is the Southwestern Ontario group that the 11th Field Regiment belongs to, and we are getting our share of the pie. We have responsibility to force generate so many positions, and that responsibility that the brigade has is distributed within the unit. So the 11th Regiment, the 11th Field Regiment has its share of the pie, and we have citizens from the area who are willingly raising their hands saying, yes, I would like to contribute. So what we talked about through history, whether it was the Boer War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Afghanistan, it continues to happen. We have citizens in Guelph and Wellington County and surrounding areas that have the citizens of Guelph. They're also citizens of Wellington County, and they are also serving overseas for Canada's military operations. So that's the international operations. We got operations in the Arctic as well, right? So that falls under domestic operation, but I'll focus on the Arctic. Arctic security initiatives. In response to evolving geopolitical dynamics, Canada is enhancing its Arctic security measures. Recent initiatives include the purchase of advanced radar system in collaboration with Australia to bolster early warning capabilities and a $420 million investment to maintain a year-round military presence in the Arctic. These operations underscore the Canadian Armed Forces' commitment to safeguarding Canada's sovereignty, supporting international peace and security, and providing humanitarian assistance during crises. So all of this is very new. So what we have currently going right now, and I'm going to get into a little bit more of that, is annual exercises. There's a time in the year where we send personnel to the Arctic. If I may say, 31 Brigade Group, Southwestern Ontario's Army presence, has taken the lead on that. And we are leading the Canadian contingent going to the Arctic, and 11th Field Regiment is part of that. So every year we have soldiers training for cold weather operations, and some of them, not everybody, but some of them, they raise their hand and say, yes, I'd like to go on these operations, and they deploy to the Arctic and contribute to that effort of maintaining Canada's presence in the Arctic. Operation Nanook is that annual series that I was talking about, annual series of Arctic sovereignty and security operations. Operation Nanook includes land and maritime components. Exercises Nanook Nunatput and Nanook Tukalik in 2024 took place from August to September, and they involve various Canadian Armed Forces units alongside with international partners. Right, so some of those international partners, if I may say, include the Michigan National Guard, which have been trained by 31 Brigade soldiers, including soldiers from the 11th Field Regiment. It wasn't too long ago that, we just last year, the regiment was in Michigan doing, together with 31 Brigade, we were doing a maneuver exercise there. We're planning to go back this coming summer. And so we had a good relationship with the Michigan National Guard, and some of our soldiers are passing on that knowledge of cold weather operations to them, and we have them as partners fighting alongside, helping us to keep that presence in the Arctic, right? So when we talk about keeping a year-round presence, we haven't got the detail of that yet. That's very new, but I imagine that will involve soldiers from 31 Brigade and 11th Field Regiment to participate in that. So those might be deployments the same way we treat our international deployments. We also have Operation Nevis. It's dedicated to maintaining the high Arctic data communication system. This operation occurs annually on Elmer Island. And this always brings me a little bit of fun. Whenever we talk about islands, we often think of the Caribbean, somewhere nice and warm, and we're talking about Arctic islands, and there's work to be done there, and some of your citizens, some of your neighbors are doing it. All right, so this is the other type of domestic operations, aid of civil power and things like that. I'll get into the specifics. Operation Lantis. This operation involves the Canadian Armed Forces response to natural disasters within Canada, such as floods and forest fires. We have Operation Vectors. That was the Canadian Armed Forces support for the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines across Canada, ensuring efficient and equitable delivery. Operation Distinction is the Canadian Armed Forces assistance to the Government of Canada's National Commemoration Program, supporting ceremonies and events that honor Canadian military history and personnel. So Operation Lantis is something that happens pretty much on an annual basis, and at this time of the year is when it occurs, right? So if you go back to January, February timeframe, if we're going to have an ice storm, that's when it's going to hit, right? And we have, especially in rural areas, loss of electricity, we have wires coming down, things like that. People are out of power. They need help in order to survive. They don't have heat. So I remember myself, I was part of the relief efforts in Ottawa area in 1998 ice storm. And I remember, chopping woods, distributing it to residents and doing things like that. So that happens on an annual basis. Closer to this time of the year, we see with the warmer weather coming on, snow melts, water levels rise, you get lots of floodings, and with those floods, right, that brings all sorts of problems, especially for people living close to rivers or lakes, and often we are called upon to go and assist, and some of your neighbors, some of your fellow residents from Guelph and Wellington County sign up and participate in this. Operation Vector, I like to think of COVID-19 being behind us. We never know. It might be COVID-19, it might be something else, right? If the government decides that there's a need for assistance in the medical field, then we may be called upon to help. I do remember when this first started, not only the distribution of vaccines, but prior to a vaccine even being available, we had military personnel going into nursing homes and assist Canadians that were in need, right? So this is something that, if you think back at the early COVID days, paramedic personnel, they were stretched thin, they were overwhelmed, and they asked for help, and we responded. Some of your neighbors, some of the citizens of these areas responded to that. So this brings us back to Title O altogether. Gunner City, military presence of Guelph. So I'm going to try to tie everything together and just tell you a little bit about the present right now. What is the tradition and the legacy? So the tradition of artillery in Guelph continues through the 11th Field Regiment, which actively trains soldiers in modern artillery techniques and plays a crucial role in national defense and international missions. Why do I think is a crucial role? Because we are contributing to all those. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to toot my own horn and say, like, the 11th Field Regiment is making everything happen. No, not at all. But we do take a piece of the pie along together with all the other units of the Canadian Forces. Air Force, Navy, military personnel command, everybody contributes, and we also contribute, and your citizens also contribute, whether as part of the 11th Field Regiment or as part of other units within the forces. The city's strong military tradition is commemorated through monuments across the city, like the Guelph Cenotaph. I can think also of the IOED cenotaph at Guelph Central Station. And this cenotaph honor the sacrifices made not only by artillery, but other military personnel from the city and the surrounding region. Should also mention, especially during Remembrance Day, we have a tradition, most of us celebrate at the Sleeping Center. We march across the city streets. We salute at the cenotaph as well. But we also have gun salutes. We fire the gun both at Woodland Cemetery and at Marymount Cemetery to honor those military personnel, those veterans that are buried there. Right? So you have military personnel from here that have served and contributed to this country, resting here in the city of Guelph. So we honor that at the time of remembrance with our artillery pieces. The artillery community in Guelph is closely connected with local events, especially those centered around Remembrance Day and other military commemorations. This interaction helps maintain the city identity as a gunner city and celebrates the contributions of its artillery regiments. Overall, Guelph's nickname as a gunner city highlights its deep-rooted history with the artillery, especially through the 11th Field Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery, and its ongoing connection to military service and remembrance. And with that, if you're okay, Ken, I'd like to open up the floor for any comments or questions from anybody here. Go
So you're
ahead.
moving away from the 105s to the 777s now?
So the 777 is the weapon that is used in the regular force.
Oh,
So the
okay.
regular force units are using that. In the reserve, we still use the 105. We no longer use the C1s, now we use the C3, which has a longer barrel.
Right.
right? But there's been talk for quite some time about replacing both the 007 and the 105. We haven't cracked the code yet. We don't have an official solution yet. But I know that people in the higher headquarters of the Royal Canadian Regiment of Artillery are looking at possibilities, and hopefully they will have a replacement weapon for us.
Thank you.
I have two questions. One is enrollment. I know in the regular armed forces the enrollment is lower or decreasing, and they're trying to improve that. In the reservist units, are you finding the same thing, that the enrollment is lower?
Yes and no. So not too long ago, when General Eyre was the Chief of Defense Staff, he was very clear and very vocal about our need to reconstitute, to increase our numbers and, you know, start building capabilities and recuperating capabilities that we had lost or were in the process of losing. So recruiting, we started making more of our recruiting effort. Right now, I am pleased to say we are doing well. We have a lot of enrollments. The way we do it is that we set targets, and I know for the last couple of years we have met and exceeded those targets given to us for the 11th Field Regiment, especially here in the city of Guelph. We're getting a lot of people interested in joining the regiment. The numbers are coming now. The concern that my higher headquarters has is not so much with recruit, is more, the concern now has turned into, if you're gonna recruit this well, you have to be prepared to train all the people being enrolled,
Yes.
right? So, and now we are focusing on training not only the new soldiers, but the soldiers that we already have. We want to give them some leadership and instructional capacities so that they can become instructors of the new recruits coming in, right? So we have a system in place, and forgive me, I'm biased because I'm the commanding officer,
That's fine.
but I think it's working well. We're getting some very positive results. But the goal is still to continue reconstituting the institution and increase the numbers as much as possible.
And my second question is, when you're deployed, say even overseas, when you integrate, I'm assuming that you would integrate with the regular armed forces over there, is there any, are you seemingly melded into them? Do they accept you readily, or is there some kind of, oh, you guys are just reservists and we're the regs and that sort of a thing?
No, it's the first scenario. When we trade with the regular force counterparts, so there's some gaps, right? So as I mentioned, they are using the M777 guns. We're
Right.
using the 105s. So some of our soldiers might not be qualified to use that piece of equipment, but our regular force counterparts, they're professionals. They work hard with us to bridge that gap and get us qualified. If we are missing qualifications that we need in order to operate, they help us bridge that gap, get us to where we need to be. And once we learn what we need to learn, then we're one and the same, right? One of the things that I find is that currently our regular force numbers are not where they need to be. So a lot of times they need our support. So in the past, I remember when I first joined, the understanding was that we would have, for operational, international operations, it was more like 80% regular force, 20% reservists. During the war of Afghanistan,
Yeah.
it was closer to 50-50, and it remains so today, right? Like a lot of times, there's that maybe not 50-50 right now, but there's a high dependency of reservists. I think that if for whatever reason, I cannot imagine why the government of Canada would do this, but if the government said 0 reservists going forward, we'll just go with the regular force, then we wouldn't be able to meet the commitments that we have as a country.
Thank you.
With the interesting political climate in the United States, has it caused any changes in our relationship with working with American Armed Forces?
Working with military personnel, no, not that I've seen yet. We have a very special relationship. I can tell you, when I was a captain training to be a major, right, I was at the Army Command and Staff College. We had, it was a year-long course. And during most of the year, one of my instructors was from the U.S. Army. Was a lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army. And the last part of the course, we actually invite soldiers from other nations, right? So in my particular course, and I'm dating myself, that was in 2011, we had a good-sized contingent coming from Denmark. We had I think one member from New Zealand, from different countries, but the United States was number one, right? We had personnel from the U.S. Army, from the National Guard, we had from the U.S. Marines as well. And just like they come and train with us here, we often get the opportunity to go and train in south of the border. As I mentioned, last year we were in Michigan, we're going back this summer. And in the past, we had lots of exercises, whether it's in Kentucky or going to California, right, Texas. So we have a really strong relationship, and because we're both NATO members, a lot of the training doctrine is very similar.
Can we buy some torches and send you down to Washington?
Burn down the White House again.
Just unspec.
You have a question?
I was just curious, you talk about training here at the Armory, but the physical training, where does that take place?
So when we fire the guns, most often than not, we go to Meadford, just east of Owen Sound.
Okay.
Right, so that's the closest training area to us where we can fire the artillery. We do have another close training area at Canadian Forces Base Borden. Unfortunately, we cannot fire the artillery pieces there. But if we have to do smaller trainings, like if we're just going to fire the rifle or do navigation exercises, we can go to Borden as well. Often we do, when we have to fire, like smaller training, we can do it at the Winona range.
Okay.
Cedar Spring Range as well. And
So there's a variety of places.
there's different places. And for the big, in the summertime, we have that big concentration exercise where we'll go for sometimes a week, sometimes 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks. We often go to Canadian Forces Base Petawawa, which is a much bigger training area than Meadford. Or, you know, we can go to places like Michigan, right? Grayling is, for us in Guelph, is just as far, you know, the distance that it takes us to go to Michigan is the same distance that would take us to Petawawa.
Oh.
There you go ahead.
How many guns are in a battery, and how many soldiers to each gun?
Okay, so I got two answers for you. Typical Canadian, right? So the official answer is there's 7 members in each gun detachment, and that includes the detachment commander and the detachment second in command, who's usually in charge of ammunition. And then the remainder of the detachment, everybody has a specific role to play, but we are trained to do everything. So I could be, you know, the gunner in charge of setting the bearing, right, which makes the gun go left and right. But some new recruits that came in, well, Sergeant Smith is not available to go fire the guns. And it's not his fault, it's mine. I asked him to train those young people. And often we have so many things happening within the military that it's tough to get a full battery worth of personnel out there. So sometimes you'll see 3 guns, sometimes 4 guns fire in the field. And within each gun detachment, you know, sometimes you'll have, in a really bad day, you'll have like 4 gunners. In a really good day, you can have like 10 gunners. And it's like, oh, we're tripping on each other. We have too many people. But so it can vary. Go ahead.
And about how many men and women are now serving with the field
With the
regiment?
11th Field Regiment, so again, that's another 2-part question. Officially, we had 178 members in the regiment as of this morning, right? But we do have some of those members are on the release process, right? So they, for some reason or another, they said, cannot do this anymore, I need to leave. So we started the release process, but we haven't got their equipment back, or they haven't signed a certain document. So they're still in the system, but they're on their way out. So on a regular parade night, what would you say, Arsen?
Here in Guelph, we have probably 60, around 60 to 70, about 60
So
soldiers up here in Guelph.
if you were to come,
And Hamilton as well.
yeah, if you were to come to the armories right now, you would see about that number, about 60 or 70, plus the folks that are in Hamilton as well, right? On paper, we got, and actually this is pretty accurate. 29 Battery in Guelph right now has, it's closer to 80 personnel, right? And then 11 Battery in Hamilton has about 30. The regimental headquarters has about 30, and then we have other people that are devoted to teaching only, bits and pieces of people spread out. Remember the people that I said are going to Latvia, so they don't count in those numbers, but they're still part of the regiment. So all in all, we have 178 members of the regiment, and I would say in one way or another, perhaps 150, 160 of them are still active. Wow. So recruiting is good. Go ahead.
How many of the big guns do you have left in the armory? And I was reading about George Drew donated 2 after World War II. Do you still have those? Isn't there
Yes.
one on the lawn and it's not there now?
Yeah, so you're talking not about the guns that we use for firing, but the World War II
Oh,
guns.
both. Are they still there in the armory building?
Yes. So those are, we have them in display. We have one gun that was actually donated to us by the 12th Field Regiment Association, and that is outside of the armories. How do I describe it? It's off to the side. It's not. You have to come if you want to see it. You have to come into the parking lot, and you'll see it next to the building.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another one, and one of the ones that Colonel Drew donated. That is towards the entrance. So as you're coming into the regiment, right in the driveway, you see it next to the building as well.
Okay.
Right, but you don't have to come all the way in. You can see it even from Farquhar Street.
Okay.
You can see it there. And there's a second one that Colonel Drew donated. That one is not in the building. We have it inside the gun park. And that one we still use. So sometimes you might see one of the guns being carried by the quad, just like it would have been in World War II period. And that's one of the guns that we use, the one donated by Colonel Drew.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Is there a regiment or part of one in Brantford?
Brantford, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So that's my old regiment, 56th Field Regiment. I was there for 2 years. That regiment actually has 3 locations, right? So just like we have 2, Guelph and Hamilton, they have 3. They have 5-4 Battery in Brantford. They also have 6-9 Battery in Simcoe, close to Port Dover, and 10 Battery in St. Catharines. Sorry, I'm listening.
Yes, I have a history question. I was wondering, how were the various elements of the 11th Regiment deployed when the World Wars came about? Like when the Canadian Expeditionary Forces were sent out, how would they be deployed in the front lines? Would they be attached at a regimental level, at a divisional level? Would they all be sent as a group, like all the batteries together, or would the batteries be separated and attached to different units?
So that's a very good question. So all the soldiers come together in a battery, right? So you'll have, let's say 6 guns into that battery. So that battery stays together. But the battery itself, it depends on what type of mission, what is it that they're doing. Usually you would have a battery supporting an infantry battalion, right? And then that's supposed to switch, right? So traditionally what we do is we have the infantry or the armor corps, cavalry back then, going into the front lines. We'll have what we call a forward observation party, and that goes up in the front lines as well. And those are, I call them the wizards, right? They, they're doing their own thing. They look a little strange. I've done that myself. You just go up there and, you look for targets, and then you start talking strange language in the radio, doing some strange calculations, and next thing you know, there's firepower raining down the range and causing an effect in the front lines, right? So different types of missions, you could have, you could obstruct the view of the enemy, you can, just screen friendly movement, you can go and destroy an actual target, neutralize an enemy position, right? Just cause the enemy to dig in and not attack cast, things like that. But those batteries would be supporting maybe one battalion at one time, and then the fire shifts to support a different battalion. So traditionally, the guns would be far behind those frontline groups, the infantry or the armor corps. And sometimes they could be grouped with other batteries as a regiment. And then you could have not just a battery, what we call fire mission battery, but you could have fire mission regiment. And then you could have like 3 different batteries firing together. I have seen pictures of some missions where you could have, gun after gun after gun, right? So if you imagine 6 guns per battery, 3 batteries per regiment, so right there you have 18 guns in a regiment, and maybe you have 2 regiments side by side. So that's a line of 36 guns, and perhaps if there's a fire mission all available, all 36 guns might be supporting that same target. They might be supporting the same effect. So they could be co-located. When I think of modern warfare, we have gone like, even during Afghanistan, we could have not just a battery, but we split the battery into troops. And you could have like 2 guns make a troop, or 3 guns troops, right? So you have the capability to split like that, and the mission will dictate, how you want to operate.
Okay. Thank you.
What is that?
Oh.
It's show and tell time.
No, please go
Okay,
ahead.
so I work with as the regimental sergeant major, so this is the regiment's pace thing. So it's the regimental sergeant major pace thing.
Oh.
It measures pace.
Oh.
So it's an 8 drill, is really what it is.
Pace of marching?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh.
Yeah. But it's also a ceremonial thing to carry as well. So this is just the regiment's pace that we have. If a number of you are familiar with the regiment, you might know a character by the name of Rod Pettigrew. I don't know if any of you have met him. So he was the regimental sergeant major that started this pace thing. So prior to that, we didn't have one that was.
I'm curious also about, I believe we provided some howitzers to the Ukraine war, have you not?
877s.
Yes, yeah, 8777. So those are equipment that we didn't go and use it ourselves, but we did send it over to.
So you don't have people there helping with those guns or?
No. So
And
I.
this whole business too of drones, when you're talking about setting up firing lines and whatnot, they're dealing with drones. Is that becoming an issue with the Canadian military?
Yes. So with the drones, we call them UAVs, and that's something that we're doing. One of our regular force units in New Brunswick, the 4th, used to be 4th Air Defense, now is the 4th General Support Regiment, and that's what they specialize in, right? So they do surveillance, target acquisition, and one of the ways to acquire targets is by using those unmanned aerial vehicles. They go, they have a camera attached to it, so we'll have an operator on the ground, flying it out and trying to find those targets, and from there they locate it and send information to the field guys for us to neutralize it, or maybe an aircraft can come and cause the effect that we want. Go ahead.
Yes, I served in the Royal Canadian Navy, and I'm just wondering, well, first of all, I'll say that we used to collaborate with other parts, other divisions of the military. Is it the case today? Are you still collaborating and working together sometimes?
Yes, we are. So recently, what I've seen a lot, actually just this week, we were in a meeting with the commanding officer of HMCS Hunter, right? So there's always cooperation between different units, different branches for different purposes, right? You also have, earlier this year in January, 31 Brigade had a brigade conference, and we happened to have it in London. So they have it that our brigade commander, who just left us, he established this tradition that we would have a brigade conference on a quarterly basis, and it would rotate through the different units, right? So we were the very first ones to hold it here in Guelph. We hosted the entire brigade, and then the next one, we ended up going to different places, different units, and we got to align ourselves and work together a lot. The last one we had this January, it was the first Hussars who hosted us in London, and they have an excellent relationship with the HMCS Prevost, and it was actually at their grounds, at their ship, where we actually met and had our conference there. It was with with Navy Corporation as well, and we can see we're doing our conference, and I could see naval personnel doing their training as well. So yes, that cooperation continues.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
What is the difference now in ranges for artillery compared to the First World War to the present day?
Yeah, it's we go further now.
I gathered that.
And I would also say we're probably more accurate too. Yeah. So it's a bit of a political question, right? Because with especially with the media now, there's a lot more pressure in being accurate and getting things right. If somebody in the artillery stream makes a calculation error, and instead of hitting that military objective, we are off by 100 meters, and we instead hit a school or a place of worship or a hospital, that would make the news, and it would be terrible political consequences for not only Canada, but our allied countries, right? They would say, look what these guys are doing, right? I remember back in the war of Afghanistan, there was a very, very strong emphasis on winning the minds and hearts of the local population in Afghanistan. So that continues today, and one way that we need to do it is by being that accurate, making sure that we pay attention, that we get it right, and it's not just our human capability, our training that needs to improve, but also the equipment, right? So technology has come a long way, and it has helped us to achieve that. But there's also that political component. Again, back in Afghanistan time, there was a concept coined, and it referred to the strategic corporal, right? So what that meant is that a corporal, perhaps somebody that has been in the military for 2 or 3 years, that person was out in a theater of operations, and if they felt threatened, there was an action happening, they had to make a very quick decision. Do I fire my weapon or not? And if they fired that weapon and that was the wrong decision, that would make the news, and now you would have the Prime Minister of Canada come and explain as to why not Corporal Jones doing this, but why the Canadian forces have taken this action. Why did Canada do this? So it was just perhaps a 19-year-old young person in a very difficult situation making that decision that's now deemed as the country's decision, and the Prime Minister has to answer. Right, so I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm trying to say, like...
Do you mind if I chime in a little bit? So I'll get to that kind of sour thing. The howitzers that we have here at 11 Field, they'll go 11.4 kilometers. We can fire 105 shells, 11.4. We do have, recently this past year, we've got a lot of more stock that we've got to fire. which is base bleed ammunition. It pushes out a little closer to 16 kilometers. On the M777 howitzers that the regular army uses, and that we sent 8 of those to the Ukrainian armed forces. They, with conventional ammunition, they can fire 24 kilometers. With rocket-assisted rounds, they can push out to 30. And with precision-guided munitions such as Excalibur, they can go to 40 kilometers. So it's, as the CEO was saying, things have come a long way with our range.
I do have one guy that carries the match to light.
So yeah, it's a lot of changes, and technology has played a big part in it. You go ahead in the back there.
Well, my name is Ron Heddle, and I happen to be the president of the Wellington County Historical Society. It's a great presentation, but there was some touches that I understand that you didn't touch on. One of them being across from the armories is Guelph's Grill Hall that was built in 1866 because the Fenian raids were happening. And that's when the militia came to be in these various little communities, like I'm from Fergus and stuff. And the liquor store in Laurier was one of the grill halls that was put up there, that's still in existence today, being used as a hall. But anyway, the other thing was, you're talking about the 1153 Regiment.
Yes. See,
Colonel R.T. Pritchard from Fergus, a farmer, was the commanding officer of the 153rd Regiment in World War I. And thanks to Mr. Pritchard, or Colonel Pritchard, and his sister, the Women's Institute created the Society Unrepresented back in 1928. But he also was part of the committee that brought the liquor into the Legion. Before that was
Victoria Cross.
But anyway, that's what I know about Colonel Pritchard, because I've done some research about the Historical Society. So.
well, thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, and the drill hole, that comes alight, so I can see it right from my office. It's right across, and I know that's a very important place for us as well.
Yeah, because that was in use until the armories that you're housed in now was put there. But it was during the Fenian raids that these drill halls came into being around the county.
And thinking that's something else that I can touch on. So those Fenian raids in 1866, if you fast forward 100 years, I think it was in 1966, there was a ceremony here in Guelph, and we had representation from the Fenian Brotherhood from Buffalo, New York, that came up, and they officially apologized for 1866's birthday, 100 years earlier.
What the Irishmen were trying to take over Ontario and hold up ransom so they could use it as a tool to get the British government or the British people to release Ireland, because Ireland was part of the Commonwealth and they didn't want to be, or at least one branch of the Irish people didn't want to
Go ahead.
Where were all the guns made?
That's a good question. The ones we have, they were in the Netherlands?
It's an American design, retrofitted in the Netherlands. So as the CEO said, the C1 howitzer, it's based on the American M1 howitzer from the Second World War. Upgraded in 1997, I think it was, in the Netherlands. The M777 howitzer is built, manufactured in the United States.
I think we could maybe... Both Chief Warrant Officer Kenny, who was the Regimental Sergeant Major, and myself as the Commanding Officer, our terms, our positions are coming to an end this June. And just to highlight the importance of the Gunner City, we're hosting that ceremony marking our change of command on the grounds of the University of Guelph. Right, so just to illustrate as a final point, that relationship, not just the 11th Field Regiment and the University of Guelph, but the Royal Canadian Artillery and the City of Guelph, it continues, and hopefully it will continue for many, many, many more years to come.
Thank you.
This is very touching for me because I had family that was in the 11th Field. I had a great uncle who was in the 43rd Battery, and his attestation papers were signed by David McCrae. So it's a really neat connection there. So it brings a lot of stuff home, and it's really great to hear all about the history of the regiment. I just want to mention that next month we have a really unique presentation, and I'm really looking forward to it. Dr. David Bird, who's from Victoria, BC, has created a documentary on the ways we remember and the Second Battle of Ypres in Canada's memory, and it's going to focus on John McCrae and the Canadians' involvement in the Second Battle of Ypres. So he's produced the documentary, and he's traveling it across country. So he made sure that Guelph is one of the sites he's going to visit. It will be shown here in its entirety. Dr. Bird will be here to talk about the documentary and introduce it, and then have questions afterwards. So that's on the 24th, which is Thursday night. I'm really looking forward to that. That's next month. And if you want to know more about our lectures and want to be on our mailing list, there's a list down at the front desk, and you can sign up, and we'll remind you of all the topics coming up.
And come to the Armories on April 26th to get a tour and see them.
That's what I'm at tonight.
Thanks to the